Welcome back to the Spoon Sports Podcast, a podcast examining current issues and topics in sports by exploring their history. It's been a while. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get right into some college football. I won't necessarily go week to week, but I'll cover some important events that have happened since last episode. Ohio State was number one in the initial college football playoff rankings and stayed there for another week, but they were recently jumped by Georgia. Georgia had a strong last couple of weeks with some great wins against Florida, Missouri, and then a top 10 ranked Ole Miss. Ohio State took down Penn State and has continued to roll for the last couple of weeks. Michigan. There's been a lot of drama surrounding Michigan for the last couple of weeks. Jim Harbaugh has been suspended for the last 3 weeks of the regular season. Michigan beat Penn State without him on the sideline. It didn't seem to matter. They ran the ball 31 straight times in the second half, and that Penn State defense didn't seem to be able to do anything about it. That Penn State offense also looks very shaky. Drew Aller, he could be good in the future, but right now he does not seem to be the answer. The 4 and 5 teams in the college football playoff rankings, there was a lot of controversy surrounding those two teams. Washington is breathing down Florida State's neck right now. They are watching their every move. A slip up, a loss, God forbid, a loss for Florida State could definitely move them back in the rankings. And Washington seems to have a good case for being the number 4 team in the country. Other than the undefeated team so far, Oregon and Alabama have both been on a roll. Even though they have one loss, they could definitely find their way back into the top 4 and make it into the playoff with some shakeups ahead of them. Just for the sake of it, they are not in the top 25, but because they are such a popular team still, somehow, I wanted to talk about Colorado for a second. Wow, have they fallen off? I mean, there's not much else to say. They were 3-1, I believe, and then after that loss to Oregon, they have just fallen off a cliff completely. I don't understand how Dion and his players can still continue to talk, have a case, talk trash, do anything when they have not won in 5 or 6 weeks. Oregon State and Washington play today. This is Saturday, November 18th. That is probably the biggest game of week 12. That's the only one that could really possibly shake up the rankings. Georgia and Tennessee also play, but I would say Georgia is a clear favorite in that one. Some of the Power 5 conference championship games have already been set. FSU has clinched their spot, and Louisville can clinch their spot with a win over Miami today. Georgia and Alabama have also both clinched their spot in the SEC championship. That will be a very big game. Some could argue that Alabama and Georgia have been looking like the two best teams in the country the last couple of weeks, and I think that's fair to say. Jalen Milroe has looked like a real Heisman contender. Finally, I wanted to conclude with a little rant about Jimbo. He is gone at Texas A&M. They fired him after they beat Mississippi State by 40, which I find kind of crazy. But I just wanted to say, I think Florida State got the last laugh with Jimbo Fisher. In 2017, when he left, he trashed the program. He said that they were cheap. He trashed the reporters. He trashed the facilities. And almost 6 years later, he had 6 years at Texas A&M, and he did nothing. He finished ranked in the AP twice at the end of the year, but he won 4 games last year, and they were likely only going to win 6 or 7 this year. So I think Florida State definitely got the last laugh with Jimbo. Right now, they're ranked number 4 in the college football playoff rankings, and Texas A&M is nowhere to be found. Next, let's talk about some Major League Baseball. The Rangers are World Series champions. They beat the Diamondbacks in 5 games, and the Diamondbacks looked simply outmatched by that loaded Rangers lineup. Shohei Ohtani and Ronald Acuna Jr. are your league MVPs. This is the first time that both MVPs have been unanimous decisions, and I can't say I'm surprised. Ohtani with another incredible two-way season. He won 10 games on the mound and hit over 300 with 40 homers. That's just incredible. And Ronald Acuna Jr. had also a historic season. 40 home runs, 70 stolen bases, never been even close to have been done before. That is very impressive. Garrett Cole and Blake Snell win both the Cy Youngs, and there have been some offseason moves so far, but nothing major. Next, on to the NFL. We'll start with the Dolphins. They're 6-3, but you could argue that their only wins are against bad teams. Their 3 losses are against the only 3 good teams that they've played. Keeping in the AFC East, the Bills and Josh Allen, they have struggled so far. Josh Allen may have an interception problem as they lost to the Broncos. The AFC North is one of the weirdest divisions in football right now. The Steelers are somehow 6-3. They continue to win. Mike Tomlin is continuing to prove himself as one of the greatest coaches, maybe of all time. The Ravens continue to roll, but Mark Andrews is out for the rest of the year. The Browns are doing well as well, but Deshaun Watson is also out for the rest of the year. And the Bengals have been struggling, and now Joe Burrow is out for the rest of the year. That AFC North is a crazy division right now. In the AFC South, CJ Stroud, he has a real case to be the MVP so far this year. He has been putting up historic rookie numbers. The Chiefs continue to dominate in the AFC West, and the Broncos and Russell Wilson, they don't look terrible. They got off to a really rough start, but they beat the Bills. They have been on a pretty decent roll so far. The Eagles still look like the best team in the NFL. The Cowboys and Dak Prescott have been rolling after they got blown out by the 49ers earlier in the year. And the Lions, Dan Campbell, not headed to Texas A&M, and they continue to be doing well. And now the Vikings. The Vikings brought in Josh Dobbs a couple of weeks ago, and he has put together some magical performances. The NFC South, overall not a good division, still wide open. The 49ers struggled with 3 straight losses, but they bounced back against the Jaguars. And rounding out the bottom of the league, the Panthers, the Cardinals, the Patriots, and the Bears. The Bears beat the Panthers, and what's interesting about that matchup is that the Bears have the Panthers pick. So the worse the Panthers are, the better pick the Bears will have. So by beating the Panthers, the Bears actually improve their odds of having a higher pick. Next, moving on to the NBA, the season is underway. The Celtics and 76ers have been really hot to start the season in the East. The Heat have won 7 in a row. They are in 3rd place in the East. In the West, the Nuggets and the Mavericks have also been really hot to start the year. Regarding the Lakers, LeBron was supposed to be on a minute limit for each games, but in the last couple of games, it doesn't really matter. He's gone over his limit to try and win the games, and it's worked sometimes. Some of the best rookies so far, Chet Holmgren has been really good. He's really been giving Wembanyama a run for his money for Rookie of the Year. You could argue that because of all the media that Wembanyama has been getting anyway, he'll win Rookie of the Year regardless of how he does. Wembanyama has been playing well, but he's been struggling from the field a little bit, not a great percentage. One of the best rookies so far, not named Holmgren or Wembanyama, has been Asar Thompson for the Pistons. He's played the most minutes per game of any rookie, and he's been great, averaging 10 rebounds per game. Scoot Henderson has been injured recently, but he struggled early on, shooting very poorly from the field. The last topic that I wanted to bring up is that NCAA basketball is back. For most teams, it's just some out-of-conference easy warm-up games, but there have been some events so far. Arizona beat Duke on the road. They jumped up to number 3 in the rankings, and Duke fell. Kansas beat Kentucky, and Duke beat Michigan State. That concludes our current events slate. This episode, I'll be discussing issues related to sports and politics with an expert in this field, Dr. Ashley Woodiwiss. Dr. Woodiwiss is a chair of the Department of Government Criminology and Sociology at Lander University in Greenwood, South Carolina. As a political theorist, his areas of specialization include contemporary democratic theory, political theory, and civic engagement. Professor Woodiwiss has taught a widely popular sports and politics course at Lander. The course culminated in a co-authored lead chapter on politics and the Olympic Games. He has won numerous teaching awards and was 2013 winner of the South Carolina Independent Colleges and Universities Faculty of the Year Award. His athletic claim to fame includes having an uncle and aunt, both of whom are in the NIIA Coaching Hall of Fame, and while a graduate student at UNC Chapel Hill, having taught Michael Jordan for 6 weeks in his American Government course. Now please enjoy this interview with Professor Ashley Woodiwiss. Okay, I'm here with Dr. Ashley Woodiwiss. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Andrew. Thank you.
We're going to spend most of our time today talking about sports and politics, which is a topic you've taught and written a lot about. For those who say keep politics out of sport, I suspect you would say politics has always been a part of sport. Can you talk a little bit about the early beginnings of the connections between sport and politics?
Well, sure. Politics has always been a part of sports. I mean, it's just that's just reality. Let me take you back to the ancient Greeks. Aristotle wrote a famous line, "Man is a political animal." And by that, he meant human nature just tends to live together in communities. He would then go on, both he and Plato would go on and talk about how athletic competition, physical education, as we call it in our day, is also a natural part of the human condition. So athletic competition has always been a part of what we human beings are about. But, and this is the important point, it's not just individual glory, it's also the glory of the polis, it's the glory of the community. So in ancient Greece, the Olympic Games, which of course started in Athens, the Olympic Games were themselves not just athletic competitions. They were competitions carried out between city states, Athens, Corinth, Sparta, Megara. These different cities would compete, and they were competing for glory. Okay, so as far back as, the 5th century BC, athletic competition was bound up with the recognition that individual athletic accomplishment or success meant glory for the city. And so the Olympic Games famously had a peace or a truce where when the Olympic Games were being held, war would stop. And so we think, look, they're setting aside war to do sports. But in fact, that was simply competition and political competition and rivalry done in a different mode, athletic competition as opposed to, physical fighting. So the point is, as you said, the fusion between politics and sports has always been in the human condition.
Yeah, we'll talk more about modern sport in just a second, but do you want to take a moment to explain what exactly you mean by politics and sport? Do you feel the need to define the issue?
Yeah, okay. Well, for me, as a political scientist, politics is all about public life. The decisions that are made that shape and form the life of a particular public. So we distinguish between local politics, state politics, national politics, global politics. But at whatever level we're talking about, politics just is about shaping and defining the shared public life of a community. Sports are athletic competitions that take part in that political context. So when I talk about sports and politics, what I'm really talking about is athletic competition, kind of publicly recognized. It's not just my two boys playing tennis. It's publicly recognized, publicly structured athletic competition. And so even the decisions of something as simple as setting up civic leagues, who plays, who doesn't, what are eligibility requirements, all of those things are in fact political decisions. They're shaping and affecting the competition, the athletic competition within a public context. So, to me, they're just kind of so self-evidently interwoven.
Yeah. So depending on the eye of the beholder, politics and sport can either be a good or a bad thing. Politics can be a source of local pride. It can bring people together, and it can help unify or inspire. But recently, in leagues like the NBA and the NFL, it has been pretty controversial. Are there any positive connections between sport and politics that you can mention?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Think about the national pride that we have during the Olympic Games when we see the diverse population of America, gender diversity, racial diversity. When at the Olympic Games, America is fully represented. The full richness of America is represented. And so when Americans win their competition, Olympic Games, there's a great deal of civic pride. So I think sports do have a beneficial effect of bringing people together, across differences, bringing people together, instilling in them a sense of pride, a sense of civic pride, national pride. So I think these are some things that sports really do have a beneficial effect in.
One arena where sport and politics are the most obviously connected, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, is the Olympics. We could easily spend the whole episode just talking about the Olympics, but can you give us a quick summary of the early years and some of the ways politics played a role? I know you already mentioned some of them.
Ancient Greece, yeah. Well, those are the earliest years. So for sure, they were kind of nakedly, and literally nakedly, but they were kind of nakedly political events. That's how it was understood by them. That's how scholarship has kind of helped us to understand it. So when we think of the ancient Olympics, we really are looking at political athletic events. In the modern world, with Baron Coubertin in the late 19th century, the whole idea was to create an Olympic Games that would transcend politics. And so what we call, quote unquote, the modern Olympics really began with an aspiration to believe a myth, if you will, that the world could be made better, that the world could overcome violence and conflict through international global athletic competition. Well, that didn't last long. I mean, one of the very first and earliest of the modern Olympics, we had explicit protests going on. We had an Irish Olympic athlete, refusing to show solidarity with the British team that he was supposedly a part of. Even climbing up the flagpole to wave the Irish flag as opposed to the flag of Great Britain. I mean, we've had protests from the very beginning. Of course, 1968, 1972 being the most dramatic instances of a political message. But Andrew, it's really interesting when you think about it, because with the Olympic Games, you get kind of symbolic protests, and then you get actual protests. When you think of John Carlos and Tommy Smith, they didn't say anything. They didn't say a word. And yet everyone understood them to be making a political statement. With the black glove and the raised fist, everybody knew. That's symbolic politics, right? And then you have the actual political protests that are going on inside the stadium or outside the stadium. Of course, 1972 being the worst instance of a political message being violently imposed on the Olympic Games. So despite the feel-good nature of the Olympic Games, the kind of massive corporate sponsorship with all the beautiful advertisements and all the lovely personal stories that we get on NBC or whatever, whoever's covering the Olympics, with the kind of gauzy background and the strings and the human interest stories, that's all lovely. But what's going on are clear, political struggles both inside and outside the stadium.
Yeah, you mentioned some of these already, but as the Olympics moved along in the 20th century, there were many instances when politics played a key role. I'm thinking about the 1936 Berlin Olympics, and you already mentioned 1968 Mexico City and 1972 in Munich. Can you talk a little bit about each of those and how politics played a role?
Sure. So, the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, has to make a decision where to host games. Countries, and in fact, it's countries, these political units, countries make bids, and Germany made a bid to have the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin. Now, Hitler was already in power. Nazism was already showing its ugly face. A decision had to, are we going to put the Olympics in Berlin, Germany, in the hotbed of racist Nazi ideology? And Avery Brundage and the IOC said, yes, we want to demonstrate that the Olympics are beyond politics. So we're actually going to give it to Berlin. That served Hitler's interests perfectly, right? And so what we had was a elaborate performance of Nazi glory. Leni Riefenstahl makes this movie about, the first kind of documentary, and the glory of Nazism is on display. Thank you very much, IOC, right? Of course, Jesse Owens' participation as a Black American not only showed that there was an alternative to German Nazism in terms of American democracy, but also put the lie to white supremacy, right? And so Jesse Owens, kind of by himself, in just his athletic performance, and he made no political message, but just in his athletic performance, he was a critique of what the whole 1936 panorama, Nazi panorama, was all about. He subverted it just by being himself, in a sense. 68 Olympic Games, Mexico City, the first Olympics kind of south of the equator. It was by the 1960s, we're in a post-colonial age. African countries were being liberated, achieving their independence. It was a post-colonial moment. Let's celebrate that by putting it in Mexico City. Fine, except that Mexico itself was in a cauldron of political protest. 1968, my goodness, Martin Luther King had already been assassinated. Bobby Kennedy had already been assassinated. 1968, as a dear friend of mine, teaches an entire course on 1968. It's perhaps the most important year in the 20th century in terms of shaping the future. As I teach my American government class, I say you can't understand contemporary American politics without understanding 1968. And the Olympic Games in Mexico City are just a part of that transformational narrative. And so you have Mexico City, you have university students by the thousands protesting in the streets of Mexico City. And then you have the protests going on inside the stadium, undertaken by Black American athletes. The TV cameras, because they're trying to keep this mythos going, the TV cameras don't show us at all what's happening out in the streets. I mean, we are the American and the global audience. This is kind of the first global Olympics in terms of TV technology. The global audience is kind of largely unaware of what the blood that's being spilled in the streets. We're focusing on the stadium. But in the stadium, we do get, Tommy Smith and John Carlos and their dramatic, iconic, if I can use the word, symbolic protests. The messages are being sent. 72, my gosh. 72 had already witnessed the one of Israel's wars. A group, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, send a band of terrorists. After 1968, the Olympic Committee understood, the Olympic Games really are sites of political protest. We need to beef up security. So some standard security was set up around the Munich Olympic Stadium. It's not like, okay, we're gonna act like we're trying to make this secure. And there was kind of moderate security, but this was an extraordinary moment. And so the Palestinian, the PLO, were easily able to overcome whatever security barriers there were, got into Olympic Village, got into the Israeli Olympic team accommodations, and, as the story is well known, held hostage, then kidnapped, and finally killed the Israeli Olympic team, all on, the global stage. And then came the one of the key moments in Olympic history when Avery Brundage, head of the IOC Olympic Commission, stands up and says the games must go on. What was a absolutely traumatic event for the global audience. I remember watching Jim McKay of ABC Sports basically staying awake for 48 hours, narrating. I remember sitting there watching him and just saying those famous words, "They're all dead. They're all dead." And you think, how can the games go on? We have to close this down and take a step back and mourn and grieve and deal with this. But Avery Brundage, part of that modern myth of the Olympic Games, so passionate, say, no, the games must go on. And they did. They were completed. But there was a pall over the Olympic Stadium. And ever since Munich, the emphasis on security has increased. The London Olympics in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, the early decade of the 2000s, the London Olympics had the largest security operation in the history of the United Kingdom, just to ensure that no kind of protest, no Munich-like event could happen in London. And so here we have, quote unquote, a myth that the Olympic Games are above politics, but over and over again, such powerful demonstrations. No, the Olympics are all about politics.
One question that I would ask is, do you think today, if something as dramatic as something that occurred in 1972 happened today, do you think the Olympic Games would still continue?
That's a great question. I would be inclined to say yes. I think there are too many I think there's an IOC imperative. They still want to construct this kind of we are the world like feeling. The corporate sponsors that pour billions of dollars of advertising revenue into the Olympic Games, the cities themselves that have their own image to preserve and protect. God forbid that there be another Munich at the Olympic Games. But if a situation like that happened, the high feelings about the Palestinian, the Hamas and Israeli situation right now, right? given, it'd be interesting to talk to other Olympic experts, of which I'm not, by the way, but I mean, I do know something about it, but it'd be interesting to talk to other Olympic experts who think about this. But I would tend to think there would be every imperative to try to make these games go on if something like that happened again.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, following that, I have kind of a sarcastic question. But what would you say is the more awful organization, the IOC, FIFA, or NCAA?
They're all awful, aren't they? They're all awful. But I think the NCAA is awful in a way different from the IOC and FIFA. I think the NCAA is simply incompetent. I don't see them as corrupt like I see the IOC and FIFA. I just think they are raging incompetents who are hung up on their own power gig. And in a sense, they just don't get it. I mean, they keep fumbling every opportunity they have. They fumble, to use a football analogy. Are they beholden to the big conferences? Are they beholden to money? Yes, of course. Are they beholden to TV ratings? Of course. I mean, the fact that the college football schedule now, we have Tuesday night games, Wednesday night games. I mean, of course, they're beholden to TV and streaming media. They're beholden to the infotainment industry, of course. But corrupt, ish. But when we talk about corruption, thy name is IOC. Corruption, thy name is FIFA. There we're looking at globally corrupt enterprises on a scale that dwarfs the NCAA. So now choosing between the IOC and FIFA, and that's a tough call. Wow, that's a tough call. I am tempted to go with FIFA as the more corrupt than IOC. I mean, the money stakes are slightly higher with the IOC, but FIFA has been so kind of patentedly, absurdly, explicitly corrupt, as opposed to the IOC, which we find out about their corruption after the fact. FIFA kind of wears their corruption as a badge of honor. So I'm gonna go, despite my love for the beloved football, soccer. I'm going to have to go and say my international organization is more corrupt than your international organization.
Okay. Yeah, I would say, coming from someone who's not super, I guess, like I don't keep in touch with soccer a whole lot, and I know a lot of people in my area don't as well. Do you think you can give some examples as to why you would say FIFA is such a corrupt organization?
Because heads of FIFA, like Infantino and prior heads of FIFA, wind up going to jail because the bids they give to cities or countries like Qatar or Saudi Arabia are so clearly bought. When Qatar got the last World Cup matches, it's like it made no sense. It was absolutely absurd that Qatar. How did this happen? Well, let's dig a little deeper and we find out. The suitcases, the trunks full of dollar bills and money that was splashing into the members at the FIFA committees. So FIFA is so laughably corrupt that we just assume it as the standard operating procedure. And so, for instance, Saudi Arabia is now the sole country bidding for the next World Cup games. Saudi Arabia, yeah, exactly. Shake your head, Andrew. That's exactly right. That's the response. I mean, you talk about sports washing, right? So the beloved global sports, and look, the problem is, it doesn't matter how corrupt they are. We're going to watch. We're going to watch it anyway, right? Very few people take the moral high ground, even when they say, I'm boycotting the World Cup or I'm boycotting the Olympics. Oh, no, we're not. We're still going to watch it. I mean, that goes all the way back to my original point, which is we can't help ourselves. Sports really are woven into our human condition. And so as corrupt as FIFA are, and they are corrupt, as corrupt as IOC is, and it is, we're watching. And they know that, we're watching.
Yeah. In more recent decades, I think the connections between sport and politics are usually associated with protest, as you've mentioned. This is also what some fans find most troubling. Keep your protest out of sport.
Shut up and dribble.
Colin Kaepernick is an obvious example, as well as that instance with LeBron James. Can you talk about how some prominent athletes who engaged in protest in earlier years, like who set the stage for Colin Kaepernick?
Yeah. When you talk about sports and politics and protest, I mean, you begin with Muhammad Ali, right? I mean, you just begin with Muhammad Ali. We're all kind of footnotes to Ali. So Kaepernick, LeBron, this whole notion of, the women's soccer team, say no to racism in FIFA. We are now at a point where we accept, despite criticism, despite shut up and dribble, we now accept this is just going to be a part of modern sports and athletic events. 68 Olympics, Ali's throwing his gold medal into the river. Did he not? His protests against the Vietnam War, his refusal to be drafted, his stands over and over and over again. More recently we got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and he's writing essays for the Guardian now. I mean, it's for me, the best athlete as journalist really is Jabbar. I mean, I read his essays in the Guardian all the time. So thoughtful about race in sports, politics in sports, and Colin Kaepernick, just again symbolic politics, just take a knee. Just all he's doing is taking a knee, but we know, right? So, Andrew, I guess my point is, sure, it is ubiquitous. It's now everywhere present, whether it's in basketball, whether it's in soccer, whether it's in football, major sports now are arenas for political protest. And it's a given. It's not going to go away.
Yeah, you mentioned when you talked about FIFA, how the fans, as much as they would like to say, we're not going to watch the league, but they really have no choice. And I think I've heard some of that about the NBA and the NFL. A lot of people who weren't fans of Colin Kaepernick's protest, or more recently, who aren't fans of the NBA really being really supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, they'll say, right, I'm done watching the NBA, but
done.
You can't watch anything else.
Right. That's exactly right. It's a monopoly in the market idea, right? It's a monopoly.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that one book that you really think summarizes things well is How Soccer Explains the World. What did you like about that book? And can you share some thoughts from a chapter or two that you find particularly relevant?
Yeah, Franklin Foer's book, How Soccer Explains the World. As a political scientist, I mean, I just love this book because it's really focusing on globalization. And for Foer, his interest in soccer, he kind of wrote himself into becoming a soccer fan. He just thought, oh, this is an interesting topic. The author just thought, this is an interesting topic. I'll pursue it. And he pursued it to the point that now he's a soccer fan. So it was really a book about globalization, with using soccer as the kind of vantage point into understanding how the world has developed, if you will, since the 1980s, becoming more interconnected technologically, economically, culturally. And for him, soccer really is the example, if you will, of what a globalized world looks like. You have national teams, but national teams are made up of immigrants who've moved. So you have players who are children. For the UK national team, you have players whose backgrounds are Northern African, right, Middle Eastern, who are now playing for the British national team, the English national team, as well as, of course, natively born English white players. So on the one hand, you have this kind of cosmopolitan effect that globalization has brought into this sport. and the sport reflects this cosmopolitan nature of our world. But at the same time, if you dig down deeper into certain clubs or certain cities, like Glasgow in Scotland, is one of the great chapters in this book. He talks about looking at soccer in this kind of tribal identity. So Glasgow, Scotland has two teams. They're the Rangers and they're Celtic. And the Rangers are a Protestant club. Celtic is a Catholic club, right? Protestants and Catholics, Glasgow, Scotland, not far from Northern Ireland, right? You've got played out in this city, you've got this tension between these two tribal, religious, cultural, historical clubs that gives you an understanding of the depth of passion and how soccer is not just sport. Pope John Paul II had a great line about soccer, and he said, look, here's the Pope. He's the head of the worldwide Catholic Church. If you're a Catholic, if you believe what Catholicism teaches, the Pope has the kind of spiritual responsibility for hundreds of millions of people around the world. He's the Pope, right? And the Pope, because he's Pope, understands things in a kind of hierarchy of importance. And of course, there's the eternal spiritual importance, and there's a whole lot of things that don't matter. But the Pope said, of all the things that don't matter, soccer is the most important thing. Right? And that's what this book basically depicts, how all around the world, and we poor Americans, we just don't get it, but all around the world, soccer really is the most important thing. If you set aside spiritual and eternal concerns, nothing else matters as much as soccer, right? And that's what the book really shows all around the world in a kind of deep dive, country by country, city by city. It's a love. Andrew, you need to read the book.
It definitely sounds like something that I'll be looking into. Would you say, obviously you spent the last part of your summary like praising how important soccer is to the world. Would you say there are any sports? I know American sports are pretty much centralized to America, but are there any other sports that you would say can represent the world even close to how soccer does?
Short answer, no. But long answer, the NBA is trying, the NFL is trying. Part of the logic of capitalism, of course, is expanding markets. And so the NFL, not comfortable with their billions, wants more billions. NBA, not comfortable with their billions, want more billions. And so they're marketing. Basketball is huge in Asia. Basketball is huge in Europe. I think if there is not American baseball, sorry, buddy. But yeah. I think if there's a single sport that has the possibility of attaining almost soccer-like status, it would probably be basketball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I guess this is like what you said about Qatar and Saudi Arabia, like kind of dominating soccer. I guess an example of that would be a lot of the players, the popular players now going from Europe to the Middle East just for money. The competition there is not nearly what it is in Europe, but the money dominates.
Yeah, I can't talk about what's happening right now. I'm heartbroken because some of my favorite players have left my favorite club to go to Saudi Arabia. It's just, and of course the PGA, the same thing in golf, right? You've got Saudi Arabia creating out of whole cloth, is creating this rival tour, so yeah, unfortunately, sports carried out in a capitalist context, sports go where the money is.
Yeah. Well, as I have concluded each episode so far in the podcast, I ask my guests to ponder not only about the past, but the present and the future of sports. When you survey the sports world today, how do you feel about politics and its role? And looking ahead 5 or 10 years, what do you think will be the big issues we will be talking about?
Ooh, fun. I have no problem with politics and sports currently. I think, again, being a political scientist and kind of dealing in this area, I just take it as a given. It's not going to go away. It's going to be with us. I think many of the protests, the political expressions that we see are progressive in terms of equality issues, whether it's women being paid, or it's more equality issues like Black Lives Matter. I mean, I think these are all expressions, aspirations, if you will, of a more fair and just society. People will disagree, of course. That's part of what it means to be in a democracy. But I think these expressions are all natural and normal. I am concerned when regimes like the Saudis and the Qataris are able to buy off, create rival money-based competitions to basically sports wash the awfulness of their own regimes. Of course, that's concerning. I don't see that stopping either. So I think you're going to have the twin tracks going into the near future, the twin tracks of continued protests, symbolic and actual protests happening, while at the same time you have sports washing continuing. I think that's going to continue. But it'll be interesting. I think two big issues in the future, will climate change actually rise to the level of being an arena where you have athletes protesting, the lack of real effort on terms of the climate. Gender issues we get, identity issues we get, race issues we get. That all makes sense. Will climate be an issue where you begin to see big protests at athletic competitions by the athletes themselves, by FIFA, by IOC, by the NCAA? Will we all be wearing green patches when we go take the field as a kind of symbol? I don't know, maybe. And I think immigration is going to be a huge one too. It's a hot political issue, of course, but both because of globalization, but also because of climate. I mean, our societies really are facing tremendous immigration pressures all around the world. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how sports and athletic competitions are or are not able to respond to this changing dynamic in our world. I think that's going to be a very interesting issue as well.
Yeah, your point about the climate is pretty thoughtful. I think there have been some instances where you might have seen some people like glue themselves to the court at basketball games. I think a lot of those have been, I guess, surrounded by the climate issues.
Yes, that's true. Will athletes start gluing themselves to the court? So I mean, that's
that's the question.
The lone protester, okay, tackle them, take them out of the stadium. See you, buddy. Enjoy your 30 seconds. How effective are those? But will leagues, will associations, will players' unions, will that kind of collective expression take root? I'm not, excuse the pun, take root, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your time. I feel like we covered a lot of important topics. I really appreciate you joining me.
Andrew, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for your good work. Really enjoyed it.
Well, that's it for the third episode of the Spoon Sports Podcast. I wanted to thank Ashley again for doing this interview with me. I feel like we covered a lot of great topics surrounding sports and politics. I wanted to also apologize for the delay in this episode being produced. It was a combination of busy schedules and finding the right time. I hope in the future I'll be able to be more efficient with getting the episode out. I also wanted to thank Ms. Taylor for being awesome and supporting me throughout this process. And again, I wanted to thank Aslan Hajavandi for helping me throughout this whole thing. Thank you for listening. I look forward to having you listen to another episode in the future.